Welcome to Industry Focus, the podcast that dives into a different sector of the stock market every day. Today is Thursday, June 2nd, 2016, so we're talking about energy, materials, and industrials. I'm joined today by Motley Fool analyst and Fool Canada head Taylor Muckerman, who happens to be a Mongolian food connoisseur.
Yes, it's been a while, but it's one of my favorites.
So before we started here, you were telling me about was it a recent trip or just a regular thing with you?
Well, we were talking about Mongolia, and I was like, have you ever had Mongolian food? And I got to thinking, it's been a
really
long
good.
time since I've had it, and it's delicious.
What? So there's a dude with sticks and stuff? Like, what are they?
I don't know how traditional it is, but I've been to several Mongolian.
This is all in
quotes.
DC, obviously.
No, DC, North Carolina.
Okay, all right.
Silver or Bethesda. There's one in Bethesda, and basically you get all your ingredients in a bowl. They have
It's like a Chipotle line, you were saying.
Well, in terms of the ingredients laid out, but there's no one back there serving you. You just go up, you fill up a bowl with all these ingredients: raw meats, vegetables, sauces, and then they have a humongous hot stone, kind of like the table we're at right now. I don't know, what would you say this is, like
3.5 feet across.
3.5 feet across, and
this is a 3.5 foot. Circular
it looks
table
like the first wheel ever created. It's just this huge stone piping hot. And yeah, he's got like 2 glorified chopsticks that are like 3 feet long.
Are they?
And they dump it all. They dump all your food onto the stone, and he's tossing it around with these sticks for like a minute, and then
it's cooking, and
then he with one swift movement swipes all your food into a new bowl.
And you sit down and you enjoy your meal.
It's fantastic.
All right, I guess I know what I'm doing this weekend. All right, so moving on to more serious matters. First up, right off the bat here, I guess we have to mention the OPEC meeting that just wrapped up. Yeah. I wrote a note here. No production cap, mostly because of Iran, but Saudi's pinky swore that they wouldn't flood the market with more oil. Is that the bottom line? I mean, anything to add?
Yeah, pretty much. We've seen some meetings before that didn't really pan out. This might just be another one of those. Times have changed.
Yeah, what was it? Qatar's oil head said that $65 oil is desperately needed, like ASAP, though.
For budgetary reasons, I'm sure. Yeah. Saudi Arabia's talking about cutting a bunch of subsidies, possibly
and
putting
they just
a portion of
bond sale. Did you see that?
I did not see that.
Yeah, like 2 days ago, they were like, "Yeah, we need another $15 billion."
They have the reserves, but they're probably just trying to get it while money's still cheap.
Right. Which is definitely the case. Anyway, we would have been remiss if we didn't mention OPEC, but there you have it. We're not really macro-y people, but yeah. Anyway,
there's Saudi Arabia has a new guy in charge, the new oil minister.
Oh, that's right. They got rid of that. When was he in charge since? Like the 80s? What was his name?
He's born or something. I don't know. I can't remember his name.
That's really bad too.
But
here, I'm gonna Google this while we're.
Yeah, go for it. We'll have it before the end of the show. But yeah, so there's a new head. He's kind of got a different take on things. So it'll be interesting to see. But as of this meeting, nothing really interesting.
A little bit closer to home, or a little bit more useful to oil investors. Recent piece on Bloomberg noted that oil finds are at a 6-decade low.
How many years is that?
It went
60.
Yeah, it went back to 1952, the last time the world found this low amount of oil.
Yep.
And it's actually rather large. It was $12.1 billion of oil equivalent. That did include gas.
Barrels of oil.
Barrels of oil equivalent. Yeah, sorry. But that's.
You said it did include gas, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's barrels equivalent of oil. And so the mix of that was predominantly natural gas.
Yeah. I'm sure. Yeah. And the article also noted that it definitely lends credence to the idea that we could be long-term and undersupplied because it takes 5 to 10 years to get all that stuff online.
Yeah.
I mean, this is not ideal right now.
No, we talk about the quickness that you can bring a shale well to market, and that's just not the case with the majority of wells in the world. And predominantly with the oil that they found last year, leaning more heavily towards offshore, which you're looking at least 7 years to develop, and a much higher cost per barrel that is needed as a hurdle rate to even justify getting those projects.
That's just it. So with all these reserves, but especially for the offshore stuff, once you find it, all your work is still ahead of you.
Absolutely.
I mean, it's just that.
You got to contract the rig. You got to drill, test wells, development wells. Then you have to produce it. You have to coordinate the tankers to distribute it, get the pipelines going. it's a process, which is why 7 years is the average.
So on last week's show, 5 to 10, 7.
Yeah.
Last week's show, you mentioned how you thought that offshore was just gonna be increasingly important in the decades ahead. Does this, the fact that we're finding less oil than we have in 6 decades? I mean, God, what was going on in 1952?
I wasn't here.
JFK, I don't even think was a freshman congressman. Like, geez. Anyway, is this add to the bull case for oil?
Yeah, not going to try and predict prices, but
Right.
supply less than demand. You'd imagine prices go up. Definitely a longer term play than what people are talking
The
about
next few
investing
years,
in oil right now, because
Yeah.
everyone's so excited about the prospects of rising prices now. But we could see prices fall again in the near term. But long term, if you don't have the product, then it could be a 5-year chart that looks really great for long-term investors rather than a 1-year chart.
Right. Final thing in that article that jumped out at me, it noted that exploration spending in 2015 was down 45% from 2013.
Yeah.
My reaction was actually, that's it?
Well, especially this year too. So
Yeah.
if you see the stats this year compared to 2013, it's going to be even more down more than that. So the crisis hasn't abated in terms of company upstream spending, and that's not just for oil. You see projects with coal export terminals being shelved. You see natural gas pipelines being shelved. 2 in particular.
What was it?
in the
Kinder Morgan
Northeast.
actually shelved a couple of months ago, like 2 pipelines or something like that?
One of them in the Northeast, I believe, was a several $billion project, and that area is really struggling when it comes to prices for natural gas. We
Especially
talk about
yeah,
New York and
in
New
the
England.
winter, yeah.
They're paying sometimes close to 50% more than the national average, just because the distribution networks aren't there. And that's a little bit to do with government and environmental activists coming in and kind of stopping that. Companies want to invest there. They're just finding it difficult. And so they're abandoning or postponing a lot of these projects.
Got it. Okay. So moving on, we don't talk enough about overseas oil companies. Tyler Crow used to always talk about Total.
Total, yeah, he's a big
Why
fan
does he
of it.
like them so much?
They're
guess he alluded to
diversified upstream, downstream, and
Yeah.
they're pretty big into renewables. So one of the more forward-thinking energy
Oil
companies, I
company,
think. Yeah.
Got it. But we wanted to chat today about Brazilian
Yeah.
commodity producers, particularly Petrobras and Vale.
Mm-hmm.
The chart on Petrobras alone is brutal.
Woof.
High of 76.6 in 2008. Just a nice downhill
It was
slide
a darling.
ever since.
It was a darling back then. Everyone was clamoring to get
leading up
off-
to the financial crisis.
Yeah, everyone
right?
was clamoring to access offshore Brazilian oil.
They have they actually have a lot of oil. 8.7 billion barrels of crude, 10.4 trillion cubic feet of natural gas. But
Sounds like big numbers, and it actually is
Right.
comparatively around the world. It's not a number 1 or number 2 reserve holder, but it's an important factor.
it's sizable and we need it.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Without it, we would be in dire straits.
In 60 seconds, can you give our listeners a rundown of the plethora of corruption problems at Petrobras?
Yeah, so
Feel free to take a minute and a half if you want.
they basically, it's been going on, or the one in particular that we're going to discuss today has been really going on since 2014 in terms of at least the investigation, dubbed the car wash scandal.
Why did it have that name?
Yeah, they're trying to scrub the government. I don't know. Anyways, you're talking about vendors overcharging Petrobras for some of the supplies and the equipment.
And
that
these
they were
are
using.
vendors that the government requires Petrobras to work with?
Yeah, so because
it's
they're
partially
state-owned.
state-owned?
Yeah, well, not partially, majority
Oh,
state-owned.
okay, yeah, even better.
And so there's a mandate in there where they have to use a certain amount of local vendors. And then on top of that, they have to sell oil at a subsidized price. They have to buy it internationally, sell it domestically. So they're really getting screwed over on the margin side.
And all of this was okay pre-financial crisis because oil was, I mean, it went up there and gave $140 a high five.
Yes, it did,
as I
yeah,
recall.
yeah.
So all that was okay back then. 'Cause
well,
oil
it was
140.
it was on the development side, but then when you have oil prices that high and it's producing its own oil, it couldn't sell its oil to the refineries in Brazil. It had to go out and buy oil on the open market
Oh,
and sell
gosh.
it at a subsidized price to the domestic market. So
How is this a good idea?
Well, for the government, it seemed like it. For the company and investors, obviously not.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm at risk of being a stereotypical American here or something, but why not just let it do its thing, make money, and tax it heavily or something?
Oh, capitalism.
Okay.
Let it do its thing. I don't know why. The same thing with Vale. It's partially government owned.
Are they nearly as
miners-
corrupt? Like what happened there?
I don't believe there's as much corruption, at least that's been announced. But you see,
Iron ore is
you
just
see,
in the
you see
tank.
the troubles of an entire country, especially the size of Brazil, being so heavily reliant.
They were
on
doing well in the two. Like, do you
materials and
remember Warren Buffett actually made a currency trade, which he never does, and he bought the Brazilian real.
Yeah.
That was like, I'm trying to remember. I think it was like 2007 or something. That's when they were. Anyway,
Interesting.
times change.
Yeah.
I read something earlier, and it was like Petrobras's corruption scandals are probably in the past. You don't necessarily agree with that, though.
Well, no, maybe within the company, but you're already seeing new discoveries or new rumors that new officials in the government are trying to undermine the probe, because you've seen the government change hands in just the last month after the ouster of their former leader, and now his newly appointed cabinet members are already suspected of trying to undermine this probe, and so I think we're still a couple
Do they
of years.
own car washes?
I have no idea. I don't think there's enough water right now in Brazil to.
Oh, gee.
With all the hydropower they need, especially with the Olympics coming up, there's probably water restrictions
Oh,
on
that's
car washes.
right. The Olympics are there.
Yeah.
Oh, boy.
Thankfully, it's only in one city, so it might not be as disjointed as the World Cup was. Even though that seemed to have gone off without a hitch, but
Yeah.
at least they can only concentrate on one area rather than sending Americans on the longest route possible to try and win the World Cup.
Right. Okay, so bottom line for foolish investors, I hear all this stuff, and I'm
Yeah.
like, this sounds stressful. I don't need this.
You don't need it. If you're a long-term investor, you don't need it. You don't want it. Therefore, I wouldn't recommend investing in it.
Would you take either of these names if we gave you shares? Like,
Oh yeah, I would take them because
then you'd sell
they've
them.
been beaten up so badly that, and if they were given to me, whatever.
Right.
I wouldn't sell them right away. I would probably give them a chance, but I wouldn't put any more money.
But even at what
risk.
might be a bottom for iron ore and Vale and
That's the
oil
thing.
and
You're still
Petrobras.
trying to call a bottom, and Petrobras, oil was above $100 for most of this time since 2008.
You know what? You're absolutely
and
right.
we've seen the share
And
price.
yeah.
When,
Okay.
With all the government mingling, not only in possible corruption, but also in the financials and their operations, I just don't see the benefit.
Just
Or the risk far out. The reward could be great, but it's going to be a stressful ride.
Right. Okay. All right. So last topic of the day. Donald Trump gonna make oil great again?
That's what he says. I don't know if he used that exact phrase, but it wouldn't surprise me. Use just very simple terms. Basically, going to deregulate oil and other fossil fuels.
What'd you think about what he said about OPEC? Did you hear that?
Exactly, no.
He said he was just like, oh, if OPEC did what they do in the world, in this country, they'd be in jail, and they set the price of oil, which I actually don't necessarily agree with, especially in the market today.
Yeah, so again, he's leaning on old truths that people.
That was true in the 70s and the 80s. But
It was
not today.
even true like in
10 years ago,
Yeah,
okay, yeah.
and maybe even as far back as just a few years ago, because you saw what happened in 2014. But then, or they tried, right? They tried to use their old mechanisms, and oil producers in the U.S.
Right.
Some of them are going bankrupt, but those probably shouldn't have been in business anyways.
Right.
And so I think he's just leaning on those old truths to where OPEC doesn't have nearly the power that it used to. As you've seen with the meetings over the past year or so that have resulted in
Nothing.
next to nothing in terms of market movements, and they can't get on the same page right now. So there's some disagreement, and rightfully so, within those ranks.
Trump's obviously pro-fracking. Which
Pro
I think
fracking, pro
everybody is. I
coal.
don't know.
Not everyone, but there's more pro frackers than there are pro coal miners.
That was the point that I found most interesting. Was the pro-coal?
Yeah.
Is that even a good idea, given that there's so much natural gas in this country?
I don't think it's a good idea because other countries are shunning coal.
Right.
And
Well, yeah, and he's like, oh, we're still sending coal to China. And I'm like, well, that's not quite true still. They're shutting down their...
Some experts have suggested that China's carbon emissions peaked last year. They're 2 years ahead of their carbon emissions reduction goals.
Who would have bet on that, right?
Not me. And they're also scheduled to build out the biggest array of solar power this year in the world. So the biggest purchaser of coal is turning a cold shoulder to it. Our coal users in the United States are turning a cold shoulder to it. I think that's a talking point, and I wouldn't recommend investing based on that.
Got it.
At least in terms of coal. And at the Fool in general, we don't recommend investing based on elections because these things take time to play out.
And then it's a coin flip.
I mean, if you invested in healthcare trying to play the
Obamacare
Affordable
or
Care Act,
something,
that took
yeah.
7 years to get through, and we're still years away from finding out exactly how it's going to impact various sectors within the healthcare industry. So we don't necessarily agree with investing based on election cycles. That being said, oil probably wouldn't do terribly if Trump was the president, but he keeps talking about reducing our impact, our reliance on international oil. But
He kept hitting the oil or energy independence.
Yeah, but we
talking
still
point.
only produce 50% of the oil we need. I doubt we'll ever produce all of the oil we need until demand comes down.
Right.
So
So you don't think, because he basically intimated that we could produce 15, 16 million barrels a day in this country. And I was like,
yeah.
to our listeners that aren't watching the video,
He oversimplifies things that
the
aren't
look on
quite-
Taylor's face is pretty.
Yeah. Considering we were producing around 9.5, now we're below 9, and
falling.
and clearly we're not rediscovering enough to produce 15 to 16 million barrels unless some countries just completely dry up and we have to. I doubt that'll ever happen.
Got it. All right. So before we head out, any interesting oil stock or material stock stories you're reading this week?
I don't know. I'm trying to really grasp the impact of the wildfires in Canada. Companies are starting to bring production back online, but we're talking about billions of dollars of lost revenue as the results of the shutdowns that they had to put in place. So it's just another one of those things that makes the energy markets entirely impossible to predict.
Yeah.
I was listening to a Motley Fool asset management not podcast, but one of their monthly reports, and Bill Mann, our portfolio advisor down there, our portfolio manager down there, was basically saying oil is one of the more hotly analyzed commodities in the world, right up there next to gold, and no one saw this coming. So how is an individual investor supposed to see this coming? So if you're a trader, maybe you can make some money off of it, but if you're an investor, find great companies. And
Bottom line,
find
look for
great
companies that
companies.
thrive, generate cash. Yeah. Cool. All right. Well, thanks for your thoughts, Taylor.
Absolutely.
Catch you later. I'm going to go get some Mongolian barbecue later.
That's absolutely. I might have to join you now that I remembered it.
And that is it for us, folks. If you're a loyal listener and have questions or comments, we would love to hear from you. Just email us at industryfocus@fool.com. Once again, that's industryfocus@fool.com. And as always, people on this program may have interest in the stocks they talk about, and the Motley Fool may have formal recommendations for or against those stocks, so don't buy or sell anything based solely on what you hear in this program. For Taylor Muckerman, I am Sean O'Reilly. Thanks for listening, and Fool on.